Good afternoon. I hope whatever storms are present where you are, they are not wreaking too much havoc. Here I was promised snow. I saw 3 dried flakes on the top of our pool cover, and now it's just rainy and miserable. Still waiting for snow. Anyway, Parshat VaYeishev. Rethinking what we are so sure we know. There are 3 sides to every story. Your perspective, mine, and then the story, the truth. When you have many people involved, you multiply that exponentially by the number that are involved. Years ago, when I was a Limudei Kodesh teacher at a community Jewish day school, we took the kids to an art gallery that was near the school, the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, for those of you that know it. And I took a group of kids that were from my Limudei Kodesh classes, and I had them all bring writing paper and had them sit in front of various pieces of art and each give their interpretation, their explanation. And I explained to them that in doing so, the artist takes a concept of infinity, puts it into a finite expression, and then you, the observer, sort of blast it out into another infinity from which you glean your own finite understanding of what you are doing. This is commentary. This is rabbinics. This is what happens in the tomes of our Jewish texts that are trying to teach us and explain to us and give us many different perspectives of the stories that we hold so dear from our Torah. When we look at these perspectives and when we consider our own, we must remember the iceberg theory. None of us is seeing the entire picture. We are only seeing our part. And thus we come to this notion of tarbut hamachloket l'shem hashamayim. The dispute of our various points of view for the sake of God, for the sake of heaven, for the sake of trying to understand better. And in doing that, we're always asking ourselves the question, what is God really trying to teach us? If you've been on this journey with me for a while, attended any of my classes, or learned with me in any venue, by now you get it. I am deeply dedicated to the texts and the narratives of our Torah, while also being intentionally aware of both the direct and the hidden lessons contained in them. It is so important for us to think very carefully when we read and learn and understand that sometimes what is not written in front of us in black and white can be even more important than what is. This is why I am pulled to commentators such as Aviva Zornberg, Nechama Leibowitz, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Shlomo Riskin, and so many other thoughtful and wise ones. They help us immeasurably in trying to discern what the lessons behind the words are. This is, I believe, what makes these texts, which we go through in a yearly cycle, continually new and open always to the applicability to our lives. We're going to begin with Professor Shalom Karmi, who writes, regarding how we balance reading our text with determining its applicability to our lives by evaluating the methodology of Aviva Zornberg. He writes, in her introduction, Zornberg spells out the 2 key elements of her method. She writes, I am trying to loosen the fixities, the ossifications of preconceived readings. To do this, a dialectic hermeneutics is essential, an opening of the eye, the ear, the heart, to a text that reflects back the dilemmas and the paradoxes of the world to the reader. The multiple interpretations of the Chumash, Kol from Midrash, Rashi, Chassidut, and similar books, foster a dreamlike, fantastic comprehension of the text, a web of what Zornberg regards as alternative but not exclusive readings. Loosening the fixities is, of course, the hallmark of much postmodernist literary criticism, as the inner landscape of the reader's mind becomes more important than the virtually inaccessible horizon of the author's intent. Ultimately, as Zornberg says of this approach, the interpretive act becomes similar to the creative act. The great danger in such an interpretive method is that one can impose any interpretation on the text and get away with it, if the audience is willing to play along. She goes on to explain that much contemporary tenured literary criticism affects a jaunty creativity barely distinguishable from caprice. In other words, we're floating away with our interpretive lens. She calls much current writing on the Tanakh, both the pop psychology books that we put on our coffee tables and some of our earnestly academic works, they consist in loose reconstructions of the text glibly authenticated as the practice of Midrash. However, for Zornberg, the meaning of Chumash and our encounter with its author is of ultimate significance, and we must be more committed to the humility of the reader in the face of the text than in the trends just explained. Of course, there are rules, decorums, a set of traditional understandings. Her primary methodological defense against arbitrariness is her allegiance to the library of Jewish literature with which she is equipped. By setting traditional sources as her origin and her constant point of reference, she can indeed appeal to the postmodern sensibility without falling into the excesses of a lot of modern criticism. So let's observe how this happens when we begin with a text that we know well. And Yaakov dwelt, VaYeishev Yaakov, in the land of his fathers' dwellings, Ba'aretz Megurei Aviv Ba'aretz Canaan, in Canaan. These are the generations. And we then go very quickly to speak about Yosef, and we read in Pasuk Gimel, VaYisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav. And Yisrael, who's now being called Yisrael as opposed to Yaakov in the beginning of this text, and we see the back and forth use of the two names, was his favorite child. Why? Ki ben zikunimhu. He was the son of his old age. And because he was his favorite child, he gave him this special gift of this ketonet pasim, this beautiful coat. Now, he loves Yosef. The brothers hate Yosef. One of the absent voices in this particular text is, of course, that of Rivka. And we often ask, where are the parents? Where is this parent or that parent when Cain and Hevel had their little incident? Or where is the family in all of this? How does the family function? The brothers saw that their father loved Yosef more than the others. VaYisneu, and they hated him. Now remember that. They hated him. They were not able to speak peaceably here. Yaakov then has a dream. He tells it to his brothers. And VaYosifu otsnoato, they hate him even more. And he says to them, listen to this dream that I dreamed. Now, how can he not know about the hatred? How can he be totally unimpressed by what is going on here, by the feelings? But he goes on anyway. V'hinei anachnu me'olimim, we're holding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf rose and also came upright, and your sheaves around and bowed down to me. And the brothers then say, you're going to rule over us? And again, v'yosifu odsne, and they hated him even more. 3 times. Hate, hate, hate. He dreamed another dream. And this time it's the sun, the moon, the 11 stars. He tells it to his father. And then it says, his father rebuked him, Vayigarbo Aviv, and said, what is this dream that you dreamed? And now, Vayikneu bo achiv. We don't read vayisnu. We read kin'ah. They envy him. They are jealous of him. So what is going on here? How do we look past the moment? How do we look past the fracture at this particular time? Why do we have envy now instead of hatred? And again, where are the parents? What's the message of all this? So Rav Shlomo Riskin talks about looking at both the practical aspects of the birthright and what is going to have to be done to ensure its continuity, as well as the more existential factors. And he speaks at length about agricultural and economic skill sets, which Yosef clearly has. And it is these practical skill sets that will enable the actualization of the aspirational aspects of the macro vision of the survival of the people. When we look at this, psychologists often encourage us in narratives to look at the inner self and the outer self. What is going on in our core, and what do we project to the outside world? And keeping that in mind, back to the piece of art, that art may come from the innermost thoughts of the artist, and then it projects messages, and people, depending on where they are and what their context is, will take different messages from the piece of art. So it is with our text. Not only do we have an inner self and an outer self, but the outer self that we project in one place may not be the same as somewhere else. The projected self at work or in talking with friends and different friends, depending on the relationships and depending what they're going through. Our outer self as a parent, as a child, as a sibling, and so on. All of this is part of the story. And we're only getting a very small piece of the pie in this anecdote, if you will, about this favoritism and the gift that is involved here. Now, again, Yisrael, the one who struggles, as opposed to Yaakov the heel as the name in verse 13, Vayomer Yisrael o Yosef, and Yisrael says to Yosef, aren't your brethren, halo achicha ro'im b'Shechem? Of course they are. They're going and feeding the flock in Shechem. Go, I'll send you to them. And he says, here I am. And then he says, Timrei et shalom achicha. Go see that it is peaceful with your brothers. The very same formula that earlier we saw, they could not speak with him words of peace. Is Yaakov the father? Is Yisrael the leader and the person who inner struggles and has outer struggles, not aware of this fracture? Does Yaakov really not know what's going on in his own family? Is he setting Yosef up? And for what? Why isn't Yosef with his brothers in the beginning? And does this portend that greater existential message that they are all just playing small roles in? And while Yosef has this one role in this dynamic, is his role very different when you look at the generational continuity of the people? Zornberg writes at length in her book, provocatively named The Beginning of Desire, how we are looking at how desire and love and devotion can often lead to total destruction, and asks that we look at the details of this particular narrative to see this. We are not, she says, to ignore the very clear clues here, more than one would ignore a villain in a fairy tale, fearful of the destruction that he or she will achieve. She explains in excruciating details how Yosef is dismembered, symbolized by the coat, dipped in blood which his father sees, and in so doing observes the antithesis of the coming together of the beautiful colors of the coat, and instead the complete wiping out, as far as he knows, of his son and the relationships that abound and that bind this family. This is indeed a trauma for many members of this family unit, and what we know as PTSD will impact further actions. Zornberg cites a Yemenite manuscript in which the goat killed by the brothers says, "You are ending two lives, for the goat was pregnant, it was female, and both the goat and the baby died." Likewise, says Zornberg, for Yaakov's purposes, the life of his son, and to some degree his own, are over in parallel formation. As Joseph will now be sold and end up in Egypt, his life is also broken down into little pieces for which there is no longer any wholeness. He will not be acting a role, but it is not a part of his backstory, which for the moment is truncated and cannot move forward. Desire has led to destruction. Desire to acknowledge one's favorite son and the love that one bestows on him. Desire to wield one's position as the favorite son. And now the family unit, as it was, is destroyed. How many times do human actions, whatever the motivation, end as such? Nechama Leibowitz follows the parallel dimension of this story on God's plane. She shows how every human action and initiative is partnered with a lesson. And indeed, part of God's goal of achieving a greater purpose beyond the immediate hurts and slights. For example, we observe so many actions here that may not come from the most honorable of intentions. God is orchestrating this extremely complicated interfacing of events and personalities to teach lessons regarding when we go too far. Yosef and Yaakov may need these corrective actions in order that God's plan is fulfilled. Similarly, other brothers will misstep as well and suffer consequences along the way. God's overall plan is actually clear, according to Leibowitz, and individual humans have to follow their own trajectory first before playing their role in the larger plan. There are clearly mefarshim that suggest that every backsliding must correlate with a punishment or a horrible event. Leibowitz acknowledges these voices, but is much more interested in God's plan being made clear through God's intervention than the actual corrective measure. As she quotes Ramban, the advice and plan of God will stand forever. This is true even if it is beyond our human capacity to understand. Remember, Yosef is sent to find his brothers. He is put in harm's way. The text indicates that he cannot find them. So why not just go home? What's going on here? Rabbi Tzvi Weinrab suggests that Ramban points out that Yosef was sent by Jacob to the brothers, but he could not find them. Ordinarily, if he would have been convinced that his search for them was unsuccessful, he would have come home. But a strange person, entity, perhaps a malach, an angel in Agadah and Midrash, appears on the scene, guides Yosef to his brothers, who then promptly sell him to the next passing caravan. In this scenario, regardless of initial reasons for actions, Yosef, who takes on orders who takes on others in sharing his dream, just waits. For what? Is this another side of him? Is this another outside Yosef or an inside Yosef that we haven't seen before? Clearly, God's purpose is laid out as we continue our narrative with Yosef now in Mitzrayim. Remember those narrow straits. Chapter 42, verses 1 and 2. Now Yaakov saw that there was corn in Egypt. Remember those sheaves? There's corn in Egypt. And Yaakov says to his sons, "Why do we look upon one another? I hear there's corn. Go get them. Go get food." So let's look at Yaakov. We see another side of him here. He's not the mama's boy that's inside that doesn't know what's going on. Clearly, he has knowledge. Clearly he's gotten this knowledge from somewhere. Clearly he's outside connections. And he may know more about agricultural planning and economics than we give him credit for. Maybe that was part of what the dream was to teach him, to prepare him for this event at the expense of his family dynamics. Yosef's 10 brothers go down to buy the corn from Egypt, and then we have this whole scenario with Binyamin, and Yosef is the governor over the land, and he sells the corn, he sells everything, and he goes through this whole thing, and he realizes that these are his brothers, but they don't recognize him. Remember, this is a broken family with relationships and shards. While Yaakov is holding on to Binyamin, perhaps his only hope at wholeness with the brothers, the destructive plot will continue, and it needs to still fully unfold. On the third day, Yosef says to them, I am doing what I do out of fear of God. If you are upright people, let one of your brethren be kept in our prison house, but go take the corn for the famine of your houses, and then bring your youngest brother to me. And they say to one another, what? How can we do this? Our father is still in distress at the loss of his other son. Yosef is trying to somehow complete one picture. The brothers are concerned about another picture. Yaakov is leading another reality. The family therapist hasn't been able to get them to share their stories and get on the same page. And then Reuven answers and says, no, not this child. Don't take this child. Now, all of this is going on, and Yosef is the viceroy, the second in command of Egypt. And then we have this pasuk, 23. V'hem lo yadu ki shama Yosef ki amalitz benotem. And they did not realize, ki shama Yosef, we often say that Yosef heard them, but it's Yosef understood them. Shema from in here, this real, intentional, soulful listening, because there was an interpreter there. Now, if you look at the conversation does flow, but the brothers are not seeing that Yosef understands what's going on. And then Yosef can't take it anymore. At this point, he turns around, he leaps, he comes back, and they try to get their act together. The path of divisiveness, destruction, and severed ties will continue on for a bit until all possible aspects of this story and its trajectory are completely fulfilled according to God's plan. There are clearly multiple lessons to be completed for various members of this drama before God can allow them to fulfill the greater vision and mission. First, as Nechama Leibowitz asks, why does Yosef tell only his brothers the first dream and then the second he shares with them and his parents? Now, traditional commentaries tell us because it's who was involved in the dream, only the brothers the first time and then the parents in the second one. What was Yosef's relationship with his brothers aside from his parents? We honestly do not know the degree to which he engaged with his brothers. What do we have? We don't have much. They hated him, they hated him, they hated him, they were jealous of him. He gets a coat. They sell him to a caravan. They come back and try to convince their father that he has been drawn and quartered. That's where Yaakov is left. And for now, that's where the brothers are left until Yosef spills the beans. Just as we know, or we think we know, what happened to Yosef, we don't really. Just as the text leaves us with these questions with Cain and Abel and others in these dyads, which are problematic. In other parts of this Parsha, and the one to follow, Yaakov will continue to be in the dark about the actions of the brothers. What do we want to read into that? Maybe if God is really having various plots play out here, not everyone can be in every scene, to put it simply. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains, we live life looking forward, but we only understand it looking back. We live life looking forward, but we only understand it looking back. As we live from day to day, our life can seem like a meaningless sequence of random events and strange occurrences. A series of accidents and happenstances have no shape or inner logic. A traffic jam makes us late for an important meeting. How often do we say, why did that happen to me? A stray remark we make offends somebody in a way we never intended. By a hair's breadth, we fail to get a job that we so sought. Life as we experience can sometimes feel like Joseph Heller's definition of history, a trash bag of random coincidences blown away by the wind. Yet, when we look back, it makes sense. The opportunity we missed here led to an even better one there. The shame we felt at our intentionally offensive remark makes us more careful about what we say in the future. Our failures seem, in retrospect, many years later, turn out to have been our deepest learning experiences. Our hindsight is always more perceptive than our foresight. We live life facing the future, but we understand life only when it has become our past. Rabbi Sachs continues to explain that in this Parsha, we see this so profoundly. We begin on a high note. Now, Israel loved Yosef more than all his sons because he was a son of his old age and he made him this beautiful robe. But with dramatic speed, that love and gift turns out to be Yosef's undoing, and Yaakov's as well. His brothers begin hating him. When he tells them their dream, they hate him even more. The second dream offends them even more. And we have this strange little statement which says, and they were jealous, but his father guarded the words. So what does that mean? Does it mean that Yaakov had any sense of the bigger picture? Or has what we call hashkafa prati and is saying, I don't understand this now, but maybe I will at another point. Maybe there's something else going on here that's beyond me. Is that possible? Why not? In the end, we may think, and many of us feel like we have to know what is going on. But in fact, we only know our part. Reuven knows what Reuven saw, and Yehuda knows what Yehuda perceived, and Shimon knows what he thought. And Yosef knows what happens to him, even though nobody else does, until he discloses it. And the story at that point will end with, do not feel badly. It was God who sent me here. You were just the vehicles. Now, how does Yosef come to that understanding after everything he has been through? We return to Rabbi Sachs. Those things that happened that seem so horrible may be there to teach us a really important and needed lesson. In the end, we do not have the entire picture. Remember, we are all human. We only see what we see and hear what we hear. We are all subject to the limitations of the iceberg theory. Only God sees all, knows all, has that perception that does not depend on forward or backward thinking, but takes it all in, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. That's the ultimate lesson. The ultimate lesson is we are not so sure that we know what we think we know. Maybe remembering that will inform our actions, our initiatives, and our interactions with each other. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and may the brightness of the lights of Chag HaOrim, of Hanukkah, encourage all of us and bring light to this fractured world in which we are all trying to thrive. Lehitraat.